Halton here. At MSA, our health and safety drives them to develop advanced safety equipment with performance and protection in perfect balance, like Globe Athletics, the latest innovation in turnout gear. Developed as athletic gear for firefighters, Athletics uses unique stretch fabrics that provide body-contoured fit for unprecedented range of motion and flexibility. It's lighter weight, less bulky, and provides the protection you need from your turnout gear. Get the full story at msafire.com/globe.
Hey everybody, welcome to Fire Engineering Talk Radio and another installment of the Professional Volunteer Fire Department, the show that is dedicated to our great volunteer fire service in the premise and supporting that premise, or let's call it a fact. I've been calling it a fact, that being considered a professional firefighter has absolutely nothing to do with earning a paycheck and has everything to do with delivering competent and compassionate service and taking care of not only our customers, but our own members as well. Tom Merrill here. So glad to have you listening in this evening as we enter the fall season. And slowly, ever so slowly, 2020 is slipping past us. And I think most people are glad to see it heading off into the sunset as we enter the fall season. And I did warn my guests that if you hear a couple strange noises, maybe like ghosts or gremlins or any crazy stuff like that, my wife is running around decorating for Halloween right now. I did close my office doors, so I think I've tuned out the ghosts and the gremlins. But in case you're wondering, if you do hear one, the house isn't haunted. Or maybe we are just for the next month or so. But not to worry, I'm okay. I'm okay. So, again, Tuesday here, September 29th. It also means fire prevention season's right around the corner. And I wanted to just take 1 minute or two of your time, as I do every year at this time, to talk about Fire Prevention Week, which this year is October 4th through the 10th. The theme this year is serve up fire safety in the kitchen, and they're focusing on cooking fires again because home cooking fires continue to represent the leading cause of most U.S. house fires. Nearly half, 49% of all those house fires involve cooking equipment or unattended cooking. So it's important to focus on that. So I ask you to head over to the National Fire Protection Association's website, nfpa.org, for all sorts of information, and they can help you start formulating some plans as to how you can get the message out for fire safety that you can practice with your family. And as long as I've been doing the show and as long as I've been a volunteer firefighter, I've been really emphasizing how important it is for volunteer fire departments to connect with their community and go out and talk about fire safety and fire prevention. And Fire Prevention Week is obviously a great time to do that. Actually, a lot of departments take the whole month of October and call it Fire Prevention Month and take the whole month to get the word out. And it's so important to get out and connect with your community. School visits and fire station tours and hosting open houses is really popular, where you invite the community into the firehouse and they can see displays and learn about fire safety, maybe get some information to take back home with them. But obviously, as I just said, it's 2020, the year everyone hates, and is thankfully coming to an end. And COVID has certainly thrown a monkey wrench at many of the traditional plans this year. And it might not be possible to bring people into the firehouse, and it may not be possible to go on a school visit. But you know what? There's still a lot of things you can do. It does take a little creativity, a little bit of planning, and some work, but many are able to still come up with ways to host an open house this year or get information out to the public. My department, for example, we're going to host a virtual open house this Sunday. Great idea that my officers, the officers in my department came up with. They're putting together little videos. Some of them are going to be pre-recorded, but a lot of activities discussing fire safety and also showing off the skills of our members with some of the equipment being used that we use. They're going to do that live. They're going to stream it live on Facebook. And we're very excited about it. We've done a great advertising campaign within our community to have people listen in and watch, and maybe watch it another time if they have to. But we're going to live stream it and see how that goes. And you can do that too. You can do that too. In the traditional school tours, Think about putting a video together of things that you cover in the usual tour, and then connecting with your schools and making it accessible to them, maybe on your website or on a Facebook page or however you do it. We have a YouTube channel as well that we're using at my department, and we're going to post video clips of firefighters in gear and talking fire safety that the teachers in the district can look at with their students. So they may not be coming to the firehouse, but we're still going to offer them some fire safety material that they can use. And I don't care how you do it. Just try and do something so you can continue to connect and to be engaged in your community. And at the same time that you're doing that, you're passing on fire safety messages and talking about your skills and what you can do for your community as far as the services that you provide. You know what else you're doing? You're showcasing your professionalism. You're showcasing your professionalism while building and solidifying the community support for your department and our great fire service. We say it all the time on this show, don't we? We need our communities as much as they need us. So continue to stay connected with your community even during these crazy, difficult times that are known as the year 2020. I hope things are well for you. I know it's been difficult. Regardless, we still have a job to do, though. People are still counting on us to be there, and they'll continue to dial 911 and await help for whatever problem they're experiencing from well-trained and competent, confident, compassionate firefighters who exhibit true professionalism at all times. Certainly not because of any paycheck, just because they're dedicated and determined to help their community. And that's the way it's always been, even before the days of 911, actually, right? Immigrants coming off the boat at the turn of last century, the 20th century, they were taught to simply pull that handle on the red fire alarm box on every street corner anytime they needed a little help. And at no time at all, a group of men, because in those days it was obviously men, who would be there to help out. It's a long-standing tradition of excellence that our fire service has been providing, my friends. For me personally, my little contribution is fast approaching year number 38. I first stepped foot into my volunteer firehouse, was introduced to this fantastic, iconic, wonderful, and professional fire service in November of 1982. And yes, I'm proud to say I'm a proud member of the Back Step Club. I did ride the back step. But you know what? I am not here to talk about that because I have another milestone that's fast approaching. My wife and I are fast approaching year number 30 as a married couple. October 19th will mark 30 years since I was introduced to the fantastic, iconic, and wonderful world of marriage. 30 years of marriage and counting, and 38 years in the fire service and counting. I was in the fire service when we first met and started dating, so it wasn't something I jumped into after we got married, but I did jump into more duties and responsibilities after we got married. Found myself entering the assistant chief ranks back in 1997. And in 1997, we had 2 children. They were 1.5 and 3 years of age. 15 years later, when I completed my final term as chief of department, somehow I ended up with 4 children. My oldest was now in her first year of college, and my youngest was still in elementary school. I don't know where the time went, but in between a lot of stuff was going on, wasn't it? Any of you married with children certainly know and understand that, between family activities, school functions, sporting activities, the demands of work, and oh yeah, the demands at the firehouse and those pesky emergency calls that continue to come in at the worst times, as happens in my department about 11 or 1,200 times a year. Certainly not as busy as many volunteer departments, not saying that we are, but still busy nonetheless. So people still, to this day, even though I've been out as chief now for coming on 10 years, they'll often ask me if I'd like to be chief again. And I'll tell you, I loved it. I loved every single minute of being a chief officer. But I often tell people I wouldn't do it again because I don't think I would put my wife through that again. Because I really don't think I realized until I got out as chief just how hard it was on her. And if she wasn't so supportive, I certainly would never have been a successful chief officer. The job consumed me, as I'm sure any of you that have been an officer or chief or administrative officer in the volunteer fire service can certainly attest to. Being a captain or assistant chief, I treated it like a full-time job because I wanted it to be successful. I wanted to be successful. I wanted to run a successful operation. I wanted to take care of my areas of responsibility as I came up through the line, even if it meant sacrificing some family time. Now, my wife was certainly so supportive, so understanding, but I got to tell you, it wasn't always easy. But I was lucky to have such a wonderful, supportive wife and family as we had children. But as many of you listening in tonight know, being the spouse or significant other of a volunteer firefighter, it's not always easy. And tonight we're going to discuss the challenges and hopefully offer some solutions for navigating through sometimes some rough waters affiliated with being married to a first responder. And I am so honored to have on the show this evening Anne and Mike Gagliano, co-authors of the book appropriately named Challenges of the Firefighter Marriage. They have helped firefighter marriages. The purpose of the book is to help firefighter marriages thrive even amidst the chaotic world of firefighting, and yes, even the volunteer world of firefighting. Anne is an author and a lecturer. She writes a column for firelife.com. She's got a great article for fire engineering that I read once and shared with my wife what every firefighter spouse should know, and that got her started with helping couples navigate these challenges that's posed by the fire service career. Mike, more than 30 years with the Seattle Fire Department. He retired as a captain, also served as a firefighter in the U.S. Air Force, so thank you for your service, Michael. National instructor, he's written so many articles, he's conducted many presentations, including at FDIC. I've sat in on several of them. This House Rocks. He wrote the book for air management for the fire service. He serves on the FDIC advisory board, and as I mentioned, I've sat in on his classes, and I encourage anybody listening in to do the same if you haven't, because you know you will not be disappointed. So I'm so excited to welcome them to the show, and I know they just got back from some travels last night, so I am even more indebted to them for taking the time to come on the show with me this evening, and also offer a special combo deal for the Challenges of the Firefighter Marriage book and the 2020 Paul Combs calendar, which, yes, 2020 is coming to a close, but the drawings are worth saving for life. But anyway, without further ado, Captain Michael and Ann, are you with me?
Yeah, man, very much with you. What a wonderful way to introduce us. If you don't mind, brother, I'm going to take you with me wherever I go, and I'm just going to have you introduce. That was.
I'd be honored, Cap.
I really appreciate it. And before Ann says hi, we'll help you out with one thing, or I'll let Ann help you out with it. You said that you've been married for 30 years, and that somehow you're not sure how 4 kids came along. I'm going to let Ann kind of explain that to you, how that happened. So, Ann, go ahead.
No, thank you.
Oh, it's so good to have you both here. I got to tell you, my oldest daughter, she lives out of the house now in an apartment in downtown Buffalo, but she came over for dinner tonight, imagine that, because she had laundry to do. So somehow she ends up with a free dinner out of it. But anyway, when she heard what I was doing tonight, the first thing she did say to me in all seriousness, "Did you interview Mom?" Because we all know that marriage can certainly be hard, and so I thank you for taking the time to be here. But I'm gonna throw it back at you, and Ann, can you tell me where you met this character, Captain Mike?
Yeah, we sound like we're kind of all in the same decade, the wonderful, magical 80s. Mike and I met first day of our sophomore year of college in 1984. A long time ago.
The big 80s.
Met the big 80s. So we've been together 36 years. August of 84. He was the student advisor for the dorm and kind of running the show, and he offered to help me move my stuff into my room, and I thought he did that for everybody, but I found out later he only did that for me. And we've been together ever since, and we actually met and were married before he became a firefighter. So we had to go through all this stuff from literally ground zero and learn it together. He first went into the Air Force so we could finish our education and get married. And it's a good thing we did because we had 2 kids right off the bat, and we needed that insurance, so that worked out. But in the Air Force, he was assigned to the fire department for the U.S. Air Force and became a firefighter there. And then from there, we were in the military 4 years, and then from there on to Seattle Fire. So we've been together 36 years, married 35 years, and that's how we met, way back when in college.
Back in the big 80s. That's then all of a sudden it's 2020, right? So I got to tell you, when I first heard of the book a few years back, I think I saw it at the Penwell booth at FDIC and heard a lot of talk about it. I definitely was intrigued, and I knew it had to be a must-read because as I mentioned, I understand certainly how challenging the firefighter marriage can be. And you two break it down and make it so easy to read and so easy to understand, and you really do get into the nuts and bolts of what can complicate a marriage. But you also do make a lot of good points about improving a marriage and making it thrive. And for anyone listening, if you haven't got a copy of the book, you got to get it and read through it. It has everything. It has danger. It has trauma. It talks about kids. It talks about money. There's sex and porn, too. It's like the trailer for a good movie, I think. But in all seriousness, you two cover it all. So, Michael, what prompted the book? What got you and Ann talking about, you know what, we're going to write a book about how marriages should thrive for a firefighter and his spouse? What got you doing that?
Well, I do want to be totally open and transparent. We try to be as authentic as we can. And I will tell you that the majority of the stuff that you just so wonderfully described was the brainchild of Annie. I mean, I helped out and gave her a perspective from the fire service, but I believe she did a masterful job of taking what's an incredibly complex and diverse topic. It has 1,000 tentacles to it. And she narrowed it down, I think, really, really well into just some key things that you can work on, and did it in a principle-centered way, not in do exactly what we did, because there is no such thing as a cookie-cutter approach to marriage. It doesn't work. You can't just cram yourself into our mold because we're wired the way we're wired. Some households have multiple jobs. Some households it's the wife that is the main breadwinner and the husband stays home. And some households it's the other way around, and some they both work. There's no real way to cram everything into a cookie-cutter mold. And she did a great job of making it principle-centered to where here's the principles that we applied to have a robust, wonderful marriage in the midst of having a robust and wonderful professional life. And, for me, that was in the fire service. In keeping with, she really is the brainchild behind it. I'm going to lob the pass over to her and let her describe how the book got started. I will tell you, all of you out there, it began the way a lot of things began. I asked a very simple question, and I got a very direct answer. Go ahead, baby.
Well, Mike, he made captain around 2006 or so, 2005, and he was assigned to be the training captain. And as the training captain, now he was no longer on shift. He was now at the training center, and he was there every day. He was now, working all day shifts, going from 24 hours to day shifts. And as the training captain, he was running into firefighters he hadn't seen for 15, 16 years, and running into them, getting reacquainted. And every single day, it seemed like he was running into someone and saying, how's your family, how's your marriage, and hearing these words, oh, we're divorced. We got divorced a long time ago. And this really started to bother him, and he was coming home and saying, because, he'd kind of only been in touch with his station for most of his career. Now he's at the training center. So every day he was kind of coming home and saying, gosh, I ran into so-and-so, and he's divorced, and she's divorced. And it was starting to really depress him and concern him. And so he and many of them were coming to him and visiting with him and saying, well, you're still married. My marriage is struggling. Do you have any advice for me? And so those two questions, or those two issues, divorce or advice, were hitting him every day. And so he finally asked me, and he said, well, I don't really know what to say. Is there something tough about living with a firefighter that I just don't know? And I said, oh, yeah. He said, well, do you have any ideas on this? And I said, oh, yeah. I've got lots of ideas. And he said, well, could you just write them down for me so that I'll know kind of what to say the next time somebody asks me for marriage advice? And so he thought I would just write down a little, a couple little notes on a Post-it note or something. And instead I handed him a typed 10-page annotated document, which was that first article that ended up in Fire Engineering. And he was surprised by the things I had observed over the years of living with a firefighter, the challenges of it, the difficulties of it. And so that's where it kind of came from, because sometimes you don't see your own issues. Sometimes it takes somebody who's outside the fire department to say, well, this is what I'm seeing. And so that's where it came from. It actually just came from him asking that question, are we hard to live with? And the answer was, yeah, and why?
Careful
so,
the questions you ask. You might get
right. You don't know what you're going to get, right? But wow, what a journey it's been, and what a start that led to this journey. And people say all the time, firefighters, they have their act together. They know how to perform at emergency scenes, and they're just so well put together. But as is pointed out in the book, and you pointed out, Mike, certainly or Ann just mentioned when you were going to the academy and hearing about all the divorces, divorce rates among male and female firefighters tends to be higher than the general population. And the other thing that's pointed out is marriage counselors indicate that marriage and family difficulties are noteworthy reasons for firefighters and their families to go seek counseling. So there's definitely some nuances there that are unique to the fire service that are contributing to these problems and these issues. And right off the bat, in part one of the book, I was hooked, I think, because you used that word profession. It was 3 things that make firefighting different from other professions. So I'm like, yes, because it is a profession. So I'd like to hear what those 3 things are. What are the 3 big things that make firefighting different than all the other occupations that are out there? Because you do a great job of getting into the science of it. But let's get to the meat and potatoes of those 3 things. And I don't know if Ann wants to take that. Mike, one of you can maybe elaborate a little bit about those 3 big differences.
Well, I'll grab it. As I was again exploring the divorce rate, and obviously, in my opinion, I'm very pro firefighter, and I love firefighters. And in my opinion, firefighters represent the absolute best of humanity. People that have honor and commitment and service, and there's just this code of ethics and decency, and that, in my opinion, should make the divorce rate lower than the average because of the character of a firefighter. And to have it be a little bit higher is shocking to me because, again, of who you are. And so it obviously is something to do with the job itself, the profession of firefighting. And so I got to thinking, well, why is that? What is it about this profession that impacts people to the point of it costing their marriage? And there are a ton more, but I kind of narrowed it down to 3 things that make it very different from the average profession. Every job has personnel issues and stress and all kinds of overhead and cranky bosses and long hours. All jobs have that, but very few jobs on this planet or professions have these three things: exposure to danger, exposure to trauma, and sleep disruption, or some type of shift, 24-hour shift, sleep disruption, where you are awakened in the night because danger never sleeps. And so those three things, when you think about it, are pretty impactful. And danger and trauma, those are the two most impactful things that a human being can go through. Danger being a life-threatening situation where your life is threatened, where you could actually die. Very few professions experience that. And trauma, which is witnessing human suffering. Trauma is an emotional element, and that has a tremendous repercussion on a person emotionally. The only other professions that really have extreme trauma, again, are first responders and our medical personnel, where they witness human suffering and wounds and injuries. And so you're either threatened yourself or you're seeing other people suffering. So you have physical repercussions, you have emotional repercussions, and then add to that sleep deprivation from being awakened. And those three things, I call them just a cocktail or a recipe for some real potential issues for a human being, and then for the person who lives with that human being, because they are impacted by these three tremendous experiences.
Right. So you mean I thought one of the differences is just that we wear, nice T-shirts or nice fancy uniforms off to work, but no, not at all. Right? There's some really there's some real things there that need to be delved into to understand these differences, and definitely exposure to danger. And you're not just talking fires either. There's a lot of other dangerous things out there that firefighters have to deal with. But exposure to trauma, you can bring that home, right? You can come home and lash out and maybe not even realize it, but it's due to what possibly you're seeing on scene or what you're dealing with in the firehouse, and that can affect your home life as well.
I'll tell you, Tom, one of the things that I feel like Anne did a brilliant job of capturing with the things that are different about our profession. And I want to say this in the context of, we're also sensitive to the fact that the spouses have a ton of challenges that they're facing in whatever it is they do away from the fire department. There's some families that are, both spouses are in the fire department, so they get to deal with it together. But what she did really well was, it isn't just that the firefighter is the hero and you should, worship the hero and understand they go through a terrible amount of stuff and anything they do is okay because of what they have to face. That's not the case, and it's not the tone of the book. The tone of the book is, this is the reality. There is going to be this trauma. There is going to be this danger. There's going to be sleep deprivation. There's going to be these exposures to things that no human being should ever have to see or witness, and we're going to see them all the time. It's going to be a steady diet of this as long as you're in the fire service. From the spouse's perspective, if you recognize and you acknowledge this is what they're seeing, it helps you to get on their side. It helps you to get in their corner and root for them and maybe have a little more sympathy and empathy when they come home and don't react quite the same way. It was never intended at all to be an excuse for bad behavior or abusive behavior, whether physical or verbal or isolation, kind of abandoning the family. Never an excuse for those types of things, but it was much more, this is what they're facing, and it might explain some of the things you see that make them behave differently than when they're away from that. Conversely, on the flip side, as the firefighter starts to recognize, I'm not this machine. We're not. Most of us anyway aren't. We're flesh and blood human beings with big hearts and feelings and emotions and all of those things that I think make us good at what we do. And the steady diet, the steady, dripping of seeing people tore up, seeing people at their worst, seeing people going to jail or losing their loved ones or watching their stuff burned, destroyed in terrible situations, even for the strongest of us, it is going to have some type of impact. And I think it allows us to now start to put in things to keep it from tearing us down, making us sick, causing the things that I think happen in family life that cause it to go sideways. We're trying to give you some things to recognize this is a different calling. Fire service, it makes no difference to me what type of firefighter you are. We like to put labels on firefighters. You know, you're an urban firefighter, a suburban firefighter, you're a volunteer firefighter, or all this other stuff. I'm telling you what, man, my view is very simple, Tom. You're a firefighter or you're not. That's the way it is to me. You're a firefighter or you're not. You're somebody who on a day when the citizens are having the very worst day of their life, they call the phone, and on the other end of 911, they're praying to God there's a well-trained fire company. I don't think they give a dime's worth of difference, whatever label you attach to the front of that. What they want to know is that there's a trained firefighter, and it has an impact. This is helping you as spouses to get on each other's side so that you can have the type of family you want, the type that you dreamed of when you decided you wanted to get married in the first place, and you can also enjoy and be a productive member of one of the greatest callings in the world, the fire service.
And you mentioned in the book too, and I mean we hear this all the time, but you have some recent stats in the book that continues to highlight that firefighting is one of the most stressful jobs, physically dangerous, psychologically taxing, much more than any other profession. And you talk about something in the book called condition red, white, and yellow. And Anne, I was wondering if you might just be able to tell a little bit about what that means, because you talk about condition red, where firefighters must react to the psychological state known as condition red. What exactly do you mean by these different conditions? Because you're hitting the nail right on the head with those three. And I was wondering if you could briefly cover that.
Yeah, a book that I recommend every firefighter couple read, and it's an odd book to recommend for marriage, but I got a lot of my material from it, and it's called On Combat by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. And you might think, on combat for marriage, we're talking about firefighting, not combat here. And he wrote this book, and it's an amazing book explains what happens when a human being, when their life is threatened. And he says in there, this is mostly about combat, but it does apply directly to firefighters as well, because your life is threatened on a regular basis. Fire is just as dangerous as a bullet. I mean, it's dangerous stuff. And he describes what happens during the fight or flight response. And when we're threatened, that's what happens. We go into the fight or flight response. And I got my stuff from many sources, but the condition red stuff comes from him. And one of the things that happens when your life is threatened is your brain function really alters, and you go into basically the animal brain, and you react even without thinking. And that's what happens. It's when muscle memory it takes over, and you're responding automatically without even thinking about it. And that's why training is so important, because if you're well trained, your body will respond without even thinking. And the greater the threat, the more likely you can go into what's called condition black. Black basically means you are so overwhelmed and so frightened that you just shut down. You can't even function. And so for the firefighter, the well-trained professional firefighter, they're so well-trained that their muscle memory kicks in, and they can function, and they stay in the yellow and the red zone where they're in full fight or flight, but they're still in control, and they can think, and they can function, and they can react without going to condition black, which just shuts you down. So that's what that's about. That's about training, working with that high stress, all those chemicals. And the more well-trained and professional that you are, the better you function in danger. Whereas the rest of us, we're running away screaming. Firefighters, they run in. The rest of us run away. So that's what those conditions mean, and it's very well explained in the book On Combat, and I go into more detail in my book on that too. So
yeah, because firefighters usually reside in that condition yellow, I believe it was, which is that you're always on alert. You're always ready for when those tones drop or when that big one's going to come in, and that's both good and bad, I guess. But I found it interesting when you talk about the military, how the U.S. Marines actually studied the New York City fire chiefs because they believed they were making some very critical decisions in some life and death and chaotic situations. So the military actually came to the FDNY and said, how do your members do this? How do your chiefs make these critical decisions? And one thing I found fascinating that was different between the military and the fire service, the military makes many life and death decisions, but when the war ends, so does that decision making. The fire service, it's a war that never ends. I found that fascinating. And this stress and these decisions and these things that you're exposed to can lead to another phenomenon that you labeled the PNS backlash, which is something I wanted to talk about too, because I think some spouses can then maybe understand what is leading up to that and what brings that on. Can you explain what brings that on?
Yeah, it's again back to the fight or flight response. When your life is threatened, as many as 30 hormones rush into your system in as little as 10 milliseconds, and depending on the threat. But that's a lot of hormones, and what most people don't realize that these chemicals are in fact hormones, and hormones change your body. They change your functions, they impact your moods, and they heighten certain things. They suppress they heighten muscle strength and skeletal strength and blood flow, and they at the same time suppresses digestion and the immune system, and all of these things happen in milliseconds, and it's good when your life is threatened, but you can only sustain this type of chemical reactions for a very short time, and at some point the body will say, okay, we're running at full speed here. All your glucose is being burned very rapidly. All of these things happen to make you superhuman, to do extreme things. You're just like Superman for a while. But then on the other side of that, the body says, okay, we've burned through all of our reserves, all of our resources. At some point, we're going to crash. And what that is called, at the fire, you're alive and you're alert, but then when that crash comes, that's what we spouses often see. And I remember seeing this. I didn't have a name for it, but Mike is a high-energy guy. And oftentimes, those first few years as a firefighter, I'd see him come home and be almost unrecognizable. And I used to call it kind of the lump on the couch, or this detached blob with no energy, and that's what I called it, but it has a name, and it's called, excuse me, I'm swallowing, parasympathetic nervous system backlash. I just call it backlash. That's a little bit easier. That is the repercussion of that adrenaline rush. You're alive and alert 1 minute, and then the next minute you're absolutely drained and exhausted, and the body says, hey, I have nothing left to give. I am shutting down, and if I don't rest, I'm going to be in serious trouble. And that's what we're seeing a lot at home as spouses, that backlash. And if you don't understand that this job, this profession, has that kind of impact because of the adrenaline hormones, you can misconstrue that as maybe laziness or detachment or disinterest in the family, when that is not the case. It is backlash. It is a physical repercussion to adrenaline. So that's what that means, and I like to remind spouses of that this is common for every firefighter. It isn't just your spouse. So be patient with that sometimes, because you physically cannot help it, that backlash.
Right.
So some soldiers, even in combat, will fall asleep because they are so drained. The body can only, sustain that for so long. So that's what that's all about.
We think you think this challenges of the firefighter marriage is just going to calls or spending too much time with the fellow firefighter friends or whatever, but there's so much more science-based things that go into it, and you do such a great job explaining it. And Mike, you tell this story in the book too about, and this certainly can present a problem, what's normal in a firefighter marriage, right? And you tell the story about a horrific accident you went to, I believe, and you came home and were talking about it, and you told Anne about it, and she was horrified with what you were telling her, but the way you were telling the story was, that's just another day at the office, isn't it? And that's, I guess we have to get our spouses to understand our side of that, as well as we got to understand that that's not normal for our spouse when we tell them some of the things that we see and hear and do.
Well, you couched that really well, going back to this. Everything that we talk about in the book is reciprocal. It's a two-way street. When Anne gets into the conversations a little bit later in this, everything is a two-way street. It's not just everything geared towards the firefighter and taking care of them, because that's not what a marriage is, and it's certainly not what a productive family is. It's reciprocal. And using your example, you need to be able to talk about at home those really difficult things that you see. And if all that happens is a firefighter who at the firehouse you're used to talking about every single gory detail you can think about, and things that would horrify people the way we talk about them, and the way we kind of process all that stuff and the things we see. If we spoke that way out in the public would be like, oh my gosh, these guys are demented. Well, if you say it that way at home, your spouse and your kids, your other family members, however you do home life, they're not used to it. It's not their world, and they're going to be disturbed by it and traumatized by it. So there's a challenge there. Conversely, you do need to be able to talk about it and get it out, because your spouse, that's your main person. That's your safe place, your home spot. Home is your safe space. Trying to figure that out, of how can I say the things that I've seen, and it's a process, and working through it, but in an open communication with your spouse, it's one of the most critical things you can do, because, when you do it in a reciprocal way, where you're getting to say the things you need to say to kind of get it out a little bit and to get your spouse on your side, your spouse is hearing it in a way that they can process it without just being traumatized by it, without just being horrified and having to shut off. Tom, all of a sudden you start to see where it becomes this thing that we want, where we're getting what we need, but we're getting it in a way that both members can then do what they need to do in the relationship. The firefighter can talk about it. The spouse can respond and provide help in a way that's going to keep all this crazy stuff we see from being a real detriment to the home life.
Right, for sure. And, it could certainly make changing diapers seem boring after a day at the firehouse, right? Or cutting the lawn or cleaning the gutters or something like that. So
I don't know, bro. I've changed a few diapers that horrified me. So, I have great respect.
That segues perfect into the next question I wanted to ask, which is exposure to trauma. The way I look at it, firefighters are exposed to trauma, but then trauma can thrust itself upon a firefighter, and there's many different types of trauma that you review in the book very nicely. There's psychological, emotional, cognitive, physical, behavioral trauma, and these can lead to a more severe state, ASD or the acute stress disorder. It can lead to PTSD, and we're certainly hearing more and more about PTSD today, and I think the fire service is finally getting their arms around that, at least recognizing that it exists, and we have to be aware of it. So what can we do as a spouse to help mitigate this exposure to trauma, Anne?
Well, in order to handle all of these things that we're talking about, danger, trauma, all of it, I decided to kind of narrow it down into what I call the 5 conversations. And these 5 conversations I came up with kind of address these very specific issues that are unique to firefighting, because communication is the number one issue leading to divorce. Bad communication or not being able to talk at all or having everything be a fight, essentially the relationship will break down. So you have to be able to talk about these things as a couple, and how we handle, I call it handling the tough runs. How do firefighters and firefighter spouses, how do we handle the tough runs? That's one of the 5 conversations. And we learned this one, literally hands-on experience. A lot of my stuff is just our own experience in dealing with this. And there's really trauma and dealing with trauma, that can go all the way up to needing counseling. But how do we just get down to the just nuts and bolts of husband and wife? How do we handle it at home? And there were two ways that we learned, or two things we primarily learned over the years in handling these tough runs. Number one, recognize, firefighter, that if you don't tell your spouse you had that tough run, that's what Mike called him. He called him a tough run. If you don't tell your spouse about it, and you're coming home traumatized, they're not going to know what's going on. So number one, you had to tell them, and then number two, have this conversation. Well, how do I respond as a spouse? What helps you? Recognize that trauma, the number one reaction, or the most common reaction to trauma, ironically, isn't tears or sorrow. It's actually anger or irritation or being short-tempered. And the reason for that is because anger kind of wraps you up and it protects you and it helps you to function. It's called a functional emotion. And anger helps you to keep fighting. It keeps the pain at bay, and it helps you to go on with your day and keep going. And ironically, that anger can be misconstrued as being angry at the spouse or being irritable with your spouse. And so back to, if you're not telling them what's going on, they're going to think you're angry with you. And I know this from personal experience. Mike would think that he's protecting me by not telling me about this horrible traumatic run, when in fact he's harming me because I see that he's angry or irritable, but I don't know why. So he had to tell me. Now I know he's had that tough run. So what do I do? And this is where it's a conversation, because everybody's a little bit different. For me, when I personally am traumatized and upset, I want to sit down and talk about it and in great detail, tell him everything I've been through, what's going on, and that comforts me. For Mike, so that's what I would do. And then for Mike, that's the last thing he wanted. He did not want to sit down and talk about it. And so here I am trying to force him to talk about it, and that pushes him away. So now we're back to him not telling me because I'm not reacting the way he needs me to. And so it took us a while to figure that out, but I finally asked him, well, what does help you? What can I do to help you? And the main thing that he needed from me was affection. That is something that comforted him and helped him get over it quicker than anything I ever could have said, was just affection and hug him. And touch is very healing. Sometimes you can't put trauma into words. And so touch and emotional just connection and affection, and that would help him more than anything. So I got really good about that. Or just give him his space and let him process it, and don't pounce on him or don't respond in anger, in retaliation, because he's irritable and he can't necessarily help it. I learned to not just get angry back at him. That doesn't help anything. Or take something off his plate for the day. Let him out of some obligations so he can just, have that time to relax. And those are some of the things that really helped him deal with the trauma as husband and wife. And then if it goes beyond that, I learned to really be okay with the fact that I'm not really able to help him with this. He can't really talk to me about it, but he can talk to a trusted firefighter or an officer or to someone else and really hash it out with them, and that helps him. And I learned to be okay with that. Sometimes all you need is someone that can help you put it into words that are beyond you, and that might be outside the marriage. Whatever it took to help him get to that point was worth it, because if you don't, you suppress all those emotions, you suppress all that anger. You might start seeking out drugs or alcohol because you can't wrap your head around it. And those helpful things that I did as a spouse, just give him space, let him talk to somebody else, that helped him to heal very, very quickly and to get over it. And I want to encourage firefighters that all you're trying to do with trauma is to make peace with the memory. It's called Making Peace. You can never forget it, but if you can make peace with that memory, it takes time to do this, but you can get to where you can think of that event without it triggering a negative response or an anger response or an avoidance behavior. You just make peace with it, and it just takes time, and it's normal to take a while to get over that.
Yeah,
so I hope that explains some of it.
Oh, absolutely. You know what the key thing there is whether it's the spouse or just family, but healthy family support is so crucial to help firefighters cope with the effects of trauma. And I was really turned aghast when I saw the statistic in the book that anywhere from 7 to 37% of firefighters will develop PTSD at some point in their career. And then estimates are from there, 40 to 80% of them will also suffer from clinical depression. So it's so important that we wrap our arms around this as far as understanding that, yes, it can happen, but there's ways to cope with it. There's ways the family can help. There's ways the fellow firefighters can help, because we have our two families. We have the home family and the family at the firehouse. And sometimes one of the reasons that firefighters are immune to trauma, or apparently immune, is because they have that group at the firehouse that seems to get them focused on something else, so they don't think about it or they quickly forget it, but eventually it can catch up with them. So in the book, lots of great information about those two families, how the fire service can help, how the family can help, and it's important that we understand this exposure to trauma over time can cause problems, not just individually for the firefighter. Like I said, the fire service is finally wrapping their arms around it, but also at home as well. So it's important as a spouse and family member to understand that. And folks, just want to take a minute here to remind everybody listening, this is Fire Engineering Blog Talk Radio, tonight's installment of the Professional Volunteer Fire Department, and I'm so honored to have my guests on tonight, Anne and Mike Gagliano, talking about the challenges of the Firefighter Marriage, their book. And I don't know if this would be a time we can mention the special deal, Mike, that you're offering for the book and also the Paul Combs calendar. It's a 2020 calendar, so I know people are like, why would I want that? But if anyone that's ever seen a Paul Combs illustration certainly knows you don't buy it for the dates on the calendar, right?
Yeah, well, it's we're pretty soon here going to wrap September up, so you'd be getting the final 3 months. The nice thing about the calendar is that even though you might not be able to use it for the months that have gone by, what we did with that calendar is Paul did a drawing based upon one chapter of the book for every month. And so he did an illustration, which you're going to love the illustrations. He does such a masterful job of putting it in a context that an image can show. And then primarily what Anne did is she took the highlights from the chapter that illustration was talking about and put that onto the calendar page. And so you get it in the book, you get it in a more detailed way. In the calendar, you get it in a more popular way, in a simple type of language and easy to remember type of stuff. And that stuff never goes away. Even if you're not using the calendar as a daily planner, the monthly stuff is just a really nice reminder, particularly, Tom, because we're in the middle of COVID.
Right.
And lots of people are home, and kids are home, and people are worried about their jobs, and some people don't have jobs, and fire departments are being overtaxed and overstressed because they're still doing all the same work that they had to do before, and they're having to navigate it in the world of all the COVID stuff. And so we've been hearing it continually that firefighter marriages are challenged. Firefighter marriages in the midst of COVID are challenged on steroids. And so it's just another way to bring into your world in a kind of a humorous way in some points. It's just a way to, bring some insight in so you can be trained. We do recognize, though, that the calendar is almost done. There's only 3 months left. So the calendars were going for, I think they were going for $20, $25. We just, basically just cut the thing in half and are going to give them to you for $10. The book is $25. So what we thought we would do, I know everybody's budget's tight, if you'd like, if you shoot us an email or catch me on Facebook, we'll just give you the book and the calendar for $30 plus whatever a couple dollars shipping, something like that. So knock off $15-20 off of what it would have cost you originally. So
$30
there you go, buddy.
The book and the calendar.
For the book and for the and for the calendar, and then I think there's a couple dollars shipping on there. We'll pay the tax. I will say this: we do only have I don't remember how many. We've got only like about 20 to 30 of the calendars left, and then once those are gone, we're out. So that deal is good for as long as as long as we have calendars. The first however many we have left, 30 or so. Yeah.
While supplies last.
Thanks for letting me offer that up.
I think I've seen that in a few stores. While supplies last.
While supplies last. Yep.
So I got there's a couple
one other thing with that. We would be happy if you send us a message. We would be more than happy to personalize it in any way that you would like to whoever you want, both the calendar and the book. Glad to sign it to whoever you want. If you're buying it for one of your crew members or for your fire station, we're happy to personalize it to the fire station or to your son or daughter who's a firefighter, whatever you'd like. We'll sign it, and when Anne signs it, you actually have a shot of the value going up. The problem is once I put my name on it, you're stuck with it. It's worthless.
Well, you're stuck. And at the end of the podcast tonight, I'll have you give some information as to how they can get a hold of you. So stay tuned for that. But highly encourage all listeners take them up on that offer because I started going through the book and I couldn't put it down, and I got notes and pages marked and highlighted, and because there's so much information that we're just covering some very basics of the information contained in the book. And I'm telling you, it can really help your marriage. It can really help you understand your spouse and your spouse understand you. And another big area that we can identify as volunteer firefighters with is sleep deprivation. Now, obviously, we don't work a 24-hour shift, but I can tell you that there's many times we're up, maybe not just once in the middle of the night, sometimes 2 times or 3 times during the night. But, Anne, that sleep deprivation can really affect a firefighter's relationship, can it not?
Yeah, and that's, I think I wrote more than one chapter on sleep issues and 24-hour shift, and Mike's sleep issues kind of became my mission in life to try to help him with his sleep issues because that definitely impacted both of us. And the reason that firefighters in general have so much trouble with sleep, it kind of goes back to what you mentioned with the code yellow. They're always typically what I would call just on. You're just on. It's the technical term for that is called hypervigilance. And that means that your senses are always just on high alert because you're always in an emergency mode. With literally, even if you're sleeping for the firefighter, they sleep with one eye open, and they have trouble going into that deeper sleep because they are awakened. And over time, the body struggles to reach those deeper levels of restorative sleep, and that can lead to sleep deprivation, which can be very damaging to your health. And all, combining that disrupted hypervigilance, compounding effects, over time it can really impact the firefighter's mood and alertness and ability to function as a spouse and as a parent when you're always kind of I call it being wired and tired at the same time. And I noticed that with Mike, and trying to get him to sleep and to stay asleep was very challenging. I learned, so these are just some tips. I'll just give you a few quick sleeping tips that have really helped us. Number 1, sleep-deprived people are being found to have very low levels of melatonin. And melatonin is the chemical in the body that is released as you're preparing to go to bed. Like when you start brushing your teeth and you have those little routines, your body says, oh, it's nighttime, I'm going to start releasing melatonin, and that's what helps you go to sleep. For the firefighter, they don't have a regular time of going to sleep or staying asleep. So their melatonin gets all messed up. And so we found melatonin is something you can find in food. You can do supplements. But the very best source of melatonin is tart cherry juice. And drinking a little bit of tart cherry juice before bed is a way to get some melatonin in your system, and that kind of helps you relax and go to sleep. So that's one thing we found. The hypervigilant have a very tough time with light. They're very light and sound sensitive. So I make our room very dark so that he has a nice dark bedroom to sleep in both day and night. He can take naps. Naps really help you get caught up on that sleep deprivation so you're not as grouchy with your family. If you can take a nap at some point during the day, that really helps. And another touch and massage really help with sleep. They release the chemicals that help you relax, so that's a good way to help them sleep. And another thing that most people don't realize, too, again, back to the cortisol and all the adrenaline and all those things, those are chemicals that need to be burned off. And if they're not burned off at a fire, they're triggered when the bells tone and the tones go off. But if you don't have a fire, they just stay in your system, and that keeps you from sleeping too. Cortisol suppresses melatonin and all these other things. So if you don't burn those off, that will keep you from sleeping. So I really recommend exercise. Exercise is really the key to being able to sleep and to be emotionally healthy and physically healthy, get all those chemicals out of your system. Only exercise can really do that. And exercise also raises your good chemicals that help you combat depression that can occur too. So exercise and sleep are the two real physical solutions to the problems of danger and trauma and sleep deprivation. So getting restorative deep sleep and exercise will make your firefighter much more pleasant to live with. So those are
so
some
I
tips.
Can tell my wife that naps are absolutely allowed.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a deprivation, just like food deprivation. You can be restored from that. You eat, and sleep deprivation, you can be restored, and naps do help. They are better than nothing.
I got to tell you, my wife tells a story all the time through my chief officer and even my officer career. It was well known that my kids couldn't get away with anything in the middle of the night because Dad heard everything. I could hear a pin drop, and I knew who was coming in at what time. And she used to say, I didn't sleep with one eye open. I slept with one eye open and one foot on the floor because I was always ready to go. And I got to tell you, since I got out as chief of department, it's like that turned right off, and now I enjoy beautiful night's sleep. I mean, I'll still get up for major calls in the middle of the night, but not like I used to. And that was a new finding for me to realize, wow, what a good 7-8 hours of sleep can do for you. So that's tough for the volunteer because we don't know when the calls are going to come, and we're on duty, say, 24/7, 365. My advice to the listeners, from my perspective, if you can do it, if your people power allows for it, break your people into squads or whatever you want to call them, sections or groups for the minor calls, the calls where maybe you don't need a full department response. In my department, it's for the medical calls and for the minor fires. I'm not talking anything structural. I'm talking a garbage can at the street or something like that where you may not need the full department to respond. We break our members into squads, we call it, in between certain hours. Some departments in my area do midnight to 6 a.m., others do longer, others do shorter, but the point is only those members on that squad have to get out of bed and respond. That allows members to reset and get a good night's sleep. Now, for a major call, everyone's still expected to go. But what the point is, for those minor calls where you don't need 30 members or 20 members or even 15 members because you need 3 or 4 for the medical call, not everyone has to get out of bed, and it allows them to build up their reserve then for when they are on call. That's one thing we found that worked in the volunteer side, for my area anyway. And maybe there's other great ideas out there that people are doing. And feel free to shoot me an email, let me know, and I'll share it. But that has worked for us. But the point is, sleep deprivation is a major problem in the fire service and definitely on the volunteer side as well.
Yeah, another couple things. Like I said, I made it my mission. Another thing that's keeping everybody awake is too much exposure to blue light. Blue light really stimulates the brain, and so I recommend that you try to limit too much blue light exposure when you're trying to go to sleep. And what do? We all look at our cell phones, LED, TVs, flat screen TVs, computers. Those are all sources of blue light, and they stimulate your brain. So try to limit that when you're trying to go to sleep. It's better to try to just read a book, or you can find there are things that are like blue light blockers, like I think they're glasses. There's certain kind of glasses, but that's something to look into. I put that in the book too. But again, trying to relax your brain when you're trying to sleep, that's already hypervigilant because of what you firefighters do, and then add to it blue light stimulation. So try to limit that a little bit. Another recommendation.
Yeah, and in New York State, as in many states, the volunteer firefighters use blue lights on their car to respond to calls. But that's okay because they're awake then. So you're saying when you're going to sleep. The other neat part of the book, and it's actually several chapters, and I'd like to just summarize them if we could, because I know everyone wants to get, if they're listening live, they want to get off and listen to the upcoming presidential debate, and I don't want to keep you fine people any longer than I have to, because you've given up your time so willingly, and I appreciate that. But 5 essential conversations that every husband, wife, spouse should have. If we could just maybe touch on that, because each of those chapters is worth a podcast of their own. But Mike, I don't know if you could start with that, with the essential conversations, the reentry time, right? The time it takes when you come off shift, or in our case, when we come back from a call. Sometimes you just need a little bit of reentry time to get back to normal. And Mike, can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, you bet. It's interesting that that's the first one that we started off with, because that is the conversation that has resonated with more firefighters, and not just firefighters, but that has resonated out in other professions as well. It is universal to people who work, because you go to your workplace, you go to the place that you earn a living, or your school, or whatever it is that you go, away from the safety of security at home, and you do the things you do there and are impacted by whatever it is that's going on there. In our case, for firefighters, it's the calling of the fire service, and it's auto accidents and EMS runs and fires and whatever mayhem the good citizens can get into, whatever difficult situations they can jam themselves up with. We're now expected to come in and provide order to that, and that has impact on us. It has, it causes things to happen both physiologically, sociologically, and mentally with how we are. And then the shift's over, or the run's over, however your department's wired, and now you segue back into the safe, secure, wonderful confines of home, or for some of you, the less than safe, emotionally, disturbed, very combative home life with, whatever it is that you have going on at home. That world of your profession crashes back into what's going on at home, and it's the intersection at the door between the firefighter coming home and now interacting again with their family members that Anne, I think, so brilliantly came up with the concept of reentry time. And it's just that little bit of time when you slide back into home, and you now meet each other at the door, you meet each other in the living room, or wherever it is that you come together. Again, this is
right, and it takes, and that could be for both. I'm losing you there a little bit, Mike. Are you still there? The phone was clicking a little.
Yep, I'm still here. You still got me?
Nope, I got you good, yep. And reentry time is so important for both the firefighter and the spouse. Both sometimes can need a little reentry time, because the spouse may have had a crazy day at home too, and and isn't ready to jump into the husband-wife or spousal relationship until they have their reentry time.
Yeah, every single one of the conversations, every single principle that we applied is reciprocal. If it's good for the goose, it's good for...
Ann, do I have you? Yeah, I keep losing Mike. I don't know what happened there. I don't know if his phone's getting low or what. So
go ahead and pick it up.
Oh, we got you back. But
are you there?
You with us, Mike?
Yeah, I still am. And do you want to pick it up? That way, maybe we won't lose the connection. I'm not
sure
why
we're losing. What's happening there, but I want to talk. And I was going to ask you too. I mean, you're very open in the book about in that chapter about you had a dark period where you were actually laying on the bathroom floor questioning whether your marriage would survive because of some things going on, and that led to your discussion on reentry time, and that was a very candid and poignant section in the book.
Yeah, I that's why I kind of start with this as the number one, kind of your first conversation about this profession and trying to work out that conflict, like Mike said, of coming back together. You've been apart and now you're coming back together. And for us, that could be as much as 48 hours apart. And then that reconnecting often for us went awry because I couldn't wait to see him back in the days with no cell phones, and we'd been apart for so long, hadn't even spoken because it was long distance. He worked in the city and we live outside the city. And me and my little boys, back then they were little, we would just pounce on him when he came in the door. And he's up all night and tired and grouchy, and so we would get this awkward reconnection, and it would set the tone for like a really bad day, because I pounced and harassed him, and he didn't respond the way I wanted him to, and he's irritated, I'm hurt, and now we're spending days recovering from a bad reentry time. And like you said, that bathroom experience was, we literally dragged him out the door to go get a Christmas tree, and he just wasn't ready. He couldn't shift gears, and the whole day went really bad. And I remember just, again, crying about it by the end of the day, thinking, I don't know if I can do this. So what I learned from that, it took us a long time, but I learned to give him just a minute. Don't pounce the minute he walks in the door. Give him a chance to decompress, to shift gears, if possible. Again, it's not always going to happen, but to just shift gears, maybe even take a nap before you drag them out the door to a day's event, and then it goes better. It goes better to not expect deep, long, intense conversation the minute you walk in the door. Those don't go well, and so I gave him that break, and then later in the day, when he's rested and had a chance to shift gears, then we have the conversation, and then it's very, very well done and better, and then I'm getting what I need, which is to connect with him emotionally and verbally and to talk. So that's what reentry time is. It's a concept, it's a tool, apply it as you will, but ask each other what helps you transition and what can I do to give you that time to transition, and this is what I need from reentry time. It's a back and forth conversation. So I hope that makes sense.
I found it interesting. The great Kevin Shea from FDNY actually would hang in his garage for a little bit before going into the house after a shift, just to decompress and get his home psyche together before going into the house. So some really good points there about understanding reentry time. And conversation number 2, essential conversation number 2, harshness and gallows humor. I know we talked a little bit about that earlier, but it's so true. And I can even tell you from my end, where I work at the Central Fire Alarm Office, I am a fire dispatcher, and it sounds so cruel, but I can be eating my dinner at the council, enjoying a sandwich and a soda, while I'm giving directions to do CPR for someone's loved one who's passing away in front of them. It just is part of the job, and sometimes the way you cope with it is this gallows humor. but you go home with that humor, it's not going to go over the same as it does at the firehouse. Am I right with that? Mike, are you with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on the same phone line with Annie, so we'll see how that goes.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we got you.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, the part about these conversations that's important is just remember you apply them to your situation. And so we could come up with 20 different scenarios for every one of these conversations, and people would say, well, I read what was true about how you guys did it, but that doesn't really apply because I have 4 little kids at home. So, when we come home from work, we pass the kids off, and then I go to work, and there is no time for this reentry time or any of this stuff. Remember, the point is the principle is true. It's real. These stresses and strains of all the conversations that we'll talk about, including gallows humor, these stresses and strains are real. There are what are causing the division and causing people to get sideways with each other, to lose intimacy, and to get divorced. What you have to do is sit down and acknowledge this is real. Now, given what our predicament is, our variables, 4 kids, 8 kids, no kids, 2 jobs, 5 jobs, whatever it is, how do we, in the situation we're in, overcome together as a team? How do we overcome this predicament? Gallows humor is a great example. We talked about it a little bit with the tough runs. We're used to a very coarse, very brutal form of humor, and it's legitimate. It's how we look at dead people and how we look at families that are devastated because they've lost a member of their family or lost everything they own or have just been cut out of a twisted up car. I could, go on and on and on. Part of the way we navigate that is by talking about it in a dark, humorous way or a sarcastic way. And amongst the team of firefighters, it's very healthy. If you're listening to that conversation and you're not part of the team, you're not in on the joke, it can come off as callous, uncaring, even at times kind of disturbed or mental. Every profession has this, Tom. Everyone. Mm-hmm. What you talk about in the fire alarm center, sometimes some of the stuff you say and do, if people heard how you said or did it or how you responded to things, if they're not part of that team, they would go, oh my gosh, what is wrong with Merrill? That guy's a twisted cookie,
Yeah.
Tom, I have friends in the education business. They're teachers, very noble, honorable profession. If you heard when teachers get together, the people that are teaching your beautiful, wonderful, little, unique snowflakes, if you heard how they talk about them when they're by themselves, I think you'd be very surprised. And the teachers care about your kids. They've given their life to teaching your kids. They love doing it. But when they're off by themselves, they vent and they let off steam. We have to be careful in talking about using gallows humor, and particularly for firefighters, harshness, because we're kind of harsh with each other and we pick at each other and we joke and we jest because we trust each other. It's part of that tough, thick skin that you have to see this stuff. Just remember, when you come home, your kids, your family, your wife, your husband, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, whatever you do, they don't have that same type of skin. They're not in on the joke as much as you are, and you have to be very careful about deadening intimacy by speaking in such a harsh way.
Right. It's so true, and it's something that we do need to, I think sometimes it just comes out of us, and we really don't pay attention to who's around and how it's impacting them. So it's important as a firefighter that we do pay attention to our actions and our words, and what works at the firehouse definitely doesn't always work at the home front. So a great conversation ahead. The third conversation we talked about a little bit earlier, handling the tough runs, and I encourage the readers again, or the listeners, to get this book and listen to what they can tell you about how to have this conversation and get through these tough runs that we all experience. And again, it doesn't matter if you're a department running 20 calls a year or a department running 20,000 calls a year. Every fire department has those tough runs, and it's important that we understand that they can impact not just the firefighter but our families as well. But I want to talk about this fix-it mentality, because firefighters by nature are fixers, right? And we get a lot of resources, and if we need more, we simply call for it, right? Habitually, we make calm out of chaos. And might take time, but eventually we're going to fix the problem. And we can bring more and more people to the scene to help us out, and that mentality can also go home with us and can cause problems. Anne, I think you put it best, gasoline on the fire, right? You don't bring that fix-it mentality home because that's like gasoline on the fire. So what's the conversation entail for the fix-it mentality?
Yeah, this one, it's a little more on the humorous side. The other ones are a little more serious. But I found this with my firefighter. Again, you said it well. You know, you live in the world of 911, extreme emergencies, and you're expected to turn absolute chaos into order and to do it very quickly and often without enough resources, and you just figure it out and you're good at it, and that makes you an excellent firefighter. But it doesn't work in an interpersonal, intimate relationship to have that full brunt of that fix-it mentality turned on you. And this took a while to explain to my firefighter, but I am not a meth addict with a needle in my arm needing this intense fix in this situation. I'm just wanting to have a minor conversation about a little problem that I'm having. And so don't turn that hardcore bada boom, bada bing fix mentality of, pulling out the dry erase board with the 5-point plan, and because it comes across, and this is why it doesn't work. It comes across as you're trying to fix me or trying to change me or applying too strong of a medicine to a very simple thing. And being in the world of emergency, again, it can amp everything up when it's really just a soft approach sometimes that's needed, and a sit down and just listen. And so that's kind of what the bottom line was, to find Mike finally learned to do this one thing when I would bring him my problems, was he learned to say, do you want me to fix this, or do you really just want me to listen? And 9 times out of 10, I really just need him to listen and to not apply some dramatic fix, which is what, it's very well intentioned. I like to remind the spouse, your firefighter really means well when they're trying to fix. But what you're really needing as a spouse, as a husband and wife, is often just a sympathetic ear, and just let me vent. Let me tell you what's going on with me without going into this hyperfix mode, because it just kind of pushes me away and can come across as negative, when even if you're meaning it positive, it can come across as very negative. And I just need you to shift back into my romantic spouse that I just want to talk to. So that's
right.
The conversation. That's where it comes from. I notice that intense fix-it when I'm just needing a soft, gentle, sympathetic ear.
and that conversation, unlike some of the others we've had, or a lot of what we talked about, is the spouse being understanding and supportive and doing things for the firefighters. There's a lot the firefighter can do to help the spouse. So
absolutely.
It's important to have that conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also like to add just one little thing to that, too. As a spouse, you sometimes think your problems don't matter compared to what your firefighter's dealing with. And so with the fix-it mentality, that seems to almost confirm that this is such a minor thing. Why are you bringing this to me? And so I like to remind spouses, yes, your firefighter does care about you. So don't feel like you can't tell them your little problems. They do matter just as much as anything your firefighter's dealing with. So that's why it's a conversation, like you said, for the firefighter to be there for the spouse, that they're just as important as the community they serve. So
Right. And the fifth conversation, which to me on the volunteer side is so important. I mean, it's important for all firefighters, but this one really hit home with me on the volunteer side, is keeping family first. The incredible, funny story in there about Alan Brunacini's wife saying, and everybody knows Alan Brunacini. We just loved him. His wit, his sense of humor was second to none. But when his wife said, Al, I think you like the guys, you love the guys at Fire Station Number 1 more than me, and his quick response, yeah, but I love you more than the guys at Station 2. That is just hysterical. But in my own case, I was so driven to success, and I've talked about on shows before, one thing I used to do is pick a night that would be my firehouse night to get my work done. And it was our training night, which was Wednesday night. And there were nights I would be at the firehouse till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning out in the apparatus bay, mounting equipment, cleaning equipment, taking care of whatever I needed to do. And my wife would look at me, or the next day she would say, what in God's name were you doing out till 2 o'clock in the morning? And I can tell you, I wasn't running around. I wasn't spending money, maliciously or anything like that. I was at the firehouse. That was my affair. I hate to say that. The firehouse was my affair. And if you're not careful, and I'd like to think I was careful because I am celebrating 30 years of marriage in a couple of weeks with 4 wonderful children. But if I wasn't careful and I didn't have a supportive wife, I could be in a lot of trouble. And Mike, you being a captain and you being a national speaker and you traveling all over now, you got to keep it in balance, don't you? Did you struggle with that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, anybody who cares about what they do, and personally, professionally, in your recreation, whatever you do, struggles with this. So it's not like it's unique to us. I think what is unique is that our calling is so significant. I mean, it grabs you, man. I mean, it's important, and being good at it is important, and you don't get do-overs, and we're not cutting out paper dolls, man. We're on the front lines of people's worst day, trying desperately to make that day better, and if we don't do a good job, there's significant impact to that, and it lasts for a lifetime. Here's what I would say about this. This is a longer conversation. I wish I had longer to talk about it, but let me give it to you in the shorter context from my own experience. The calling is significant, and I spent the better part of my professional life trying to get good at it. I can tell you, and it's important for every one of you to recognize, especially those of you that are overdoing your amount of time at the detriment to your family. There is going to come a day, mine has happened, there's going to come a day when you hang your coat on the hook for the last time, and your fire service career is going to be over. And on that day, and I did that. I mean, I can stand very honestly before God or before any of you and say, I gave Seattle Fire pretty much everything I had. I really did. I worked hard at it. I gave it everything I had, but I never sacrificed my family in the process. And it's a good thing. Because the day my coat went on the hook, Tom, how long do you think it took Seattle Fire to get over me?
Oh, like the cemetery's filled with irreplaceable people, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I
one
think,
shift,
I think
if that.
Yeah, there was respect, for the work that was done. There was. It's not like I did not feel unrespected or forgotten, if you will. But I can tell you, Tom, on the last shift that I worked for Seattle Fire, I was already kicked out of the email and the login system. I couldn't even log on to my own rig to do my last shift of work. My guys had to log me on. And that's not a shot at Seattle Fire. The point is the job is going to keep going. The runs are going to keep happening. Your organization, however your organization is designed, is going to put bodies into your seat. The next man has to step up, and the runs keep happening. Your time will be done. What a tragedy on that day if you go home to an empty house. You go home to a broken relationship, a broken family, a home life that was shattered on the rocks of too much time spent in something that in and of itself is good. The fire service is good. The calling is good and honorable. No calling is worth the destruction of your family. Tom, we talk to chaplains all the time. So if you want to get a sour look, this is what I say to chaplains all the time in big groups. so they can gang up on me. One of the things that they will say in the chaplaincy or in the church world, they'll say, well, yeah, if the church doors are open, I'm there. If the church doors are open, we're going to be there. And I said, just so you know, I think the idea that if the church doors are open for the regular person and you have to be there, that's sin. Because there's a whole lot of other things going on in a person's life besides what's happening in those church doors. There's family life, there's friends and neighbors and that social element we have, there's spiritual well-being, there's recreation, there's work and maintaining your own home and the things that you've been given. There's personal development, there's professional development and work to be worthy of your pay. We're this big conglomeration of a lot of different things. And we need to be able to give time to all of those things and not just focus so much in one area. Tom, the best way to do it, because I was committed to the fire service, and I was committed before God to the girl on the other end of this phone line to have a productive marriage and to raise our kids in a good way and have a good home life. The best way that Ann and I found was very simple. We did it together. And we talked about every single commitment that we had, and that commitment was balanced against the priorities that we have. And if you don't know what your priorities are, I can guarantee you your priorities are probably going to get decided for you. The single best piece of advice we can give is once you get off this phone line, sometime tonight or sometime when you have some peace and quiet, sit down with the person that you are married to or that you live with or however you do life. Sit down with them and really clearly, honestly go through, here's where we drive the stake in the sand, these are our priorities, this gets our first attention, everything else gets our secondary and tertiary attention, and it goes to support these things which are our main things. And when we get out of whack, we appeal right back to here's what we agreed to, or we change those agreements. It'll change the way you do life. I can follow you around, Tom, you and your listeners, I can follow you around for a week with a video camera. And I will watch where you put your money and where you put your time, and that'll give me a very clear snapshot of what your priorities are. And I don't want to do that. A lot of other things I don't want to see there, following you with a camera. But you can do that. So look at with the person that you love the most. Where does our money go, our resources, our emotional energy, our money, and where do we spend our time? That tells us what our priorities are, and does that jive with what we think should be true in our family, and it will help you to keep your first family first.
Oh, excellent advice, excellent advice. And I know we skimmed through a lot of highlights of the book, but there is so much more great information to read and to digest, and dealing with money and finances and the powerful healing power of a simple touch, even sex, seriously, and its vital impact on marriage, children issues and how they affect the fire service or the firefighter and vice versa. So much more that I encourage you, the listener, to delve into it. And Mike and Ann, I know we're running out of time, but I just want to take one more couple of minutes of your time if I could, because I have just a couple of questions for each of you that kind of maybe aren't in the book, but for any of our volunteer firefighter friends out there, might help them because they're a little volunteer twist to thing. Number one, and Mike, I'll start with you. As I said, the volunteer firefighter marriage is definitely a little bit unique, simply based on it's so unpredictable of when that call is going to come in. It is so unpredictable because to get a new fire engine or ladder truck or tanker or tender, whatever it is, you don't build it and spec it and have meetings on a shift. You're going home from your paid job and going to the firehouse after dinner, after coaching that little league game, maybe instead of coaching that little league game. You could be planning a family event at your house for a party, for a christening, a first communion, Christmas, Thanksgiving, Rosh Hashanah, whatever the case may be. You're hosting it. A call comes in. Don't worry, I'm not leaving today. But it's that call. It's not a minor call. These are the things that can really wreak havoc in a volunteer firefighter's marriage. And I'm really putting you on the limb out there, Mike. What do you have to suggest keeping family first in those situations? I guess it's a balancing act as well as I'm speaking for you, communicating to the spouse and not catching them off guard that you have that meeting that night. Can you think of other things that might help in that situation?
Oh, yeah. Some of it were echoed in my earlier words.
Yes, they were.
For all of you that are listening, there's a reality to life, and there is no magic. There's no magic wand that waves it away. We're a country and maybe a world, but I love our country. We're a country that is grappling with the idea that personal responsibility is somebody else's job, not yours. And it's not true. It's never going to be true. You are responsible for your actions. You are responsible for your life. Nobody else is. And when you decide to have a relationship, when Anne and I decided that we wanted to be married, this is our world and our worldview I'm sharing with you. We knelt before a God that we believe in as much as I believe I'm talking to you. We knelt on our knees before God, and we committed before God to love each other with our lives, to feature our marriage, and to support each other and have a blast living and doing life together. Part of that was that our interests and our professions, the things that we did, intersected, and we had a responsibility to each other to ensure that the other person's needs were met. I know that that's not popular. That's not popular philosophy nowadays. Marriage philosophy now that we hear is you need to make sure that your needs are being taken care of and what's in it for you. Our book is not about that. We don't believe that. We believe that you feature the other person's needs first. With that as a philosophy, if you're both doing that, both of your needs have a much better chance of getting met. To use that as the foundation, Tom, I don't care what system you're in, volunteer, paid on call, part paid on call, you pick the system, whatever it is, you sit down with your spouse and you explain to them that system, and you together decide if what's going on in that system works with your marriage. If you get your spouse on your side, now all of a sudden you've got a spouse that says, look, I hate that Christmas dinner was interrupted. I hate it. This is not Disneyland. It was a bummer that I hate that you had to leave the kids' football game to go to that big fire. But because we're doing it together, because we've agreed we're going to live this life together, and we've agreed that the volunteer firefighting department that I'm a part of, the professional department that I'm a part of, the whatever thing that you're doing, that's what we're doing as a family. It makes it that much more easier to get on board with it. And it also allows some checks and balances. It allows, Tom, you said you were up till 2 a.m. It allows for you with your spouse to say, look, 2 a.m. is too much. You can be there until midnight. That works for our family. And then you as the firefighter have to say, okay, if that's what works for our family, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do work till midnight, and then I'm going to be home because that's the commitment I made. All of a sudden, it's not you doing your own thing and your spouse doing their own thing, and you hope it works out, which is what a lot of marriages are doing right now. It's we're both doing the things that we agreed we would do, and we're doing it in concert with what works for our family. And I think it'll absolutely change a lot of the conversations you have in your marriage.
Fantastic advice, Mike, really, really, and you hit the nail on the head with so many important aspects. And if I was to ask you to end this on an even more positive note, love the story in the book, the story of the birds and how they fly in a V formation and how it can serve to inspire us all as to what two can accomplish together. Husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever the case may be, whatever is your world, to aim for unselfish teamwork. Can you sum up for us, the listeners, the story of those birds flying in the V formation and how you equate that to a successful marriage?
Yeah, I love the V formation. It is a really unique phenomenon in nature. And what the V formation is the migrating formation that birds form when they're flying a long distance. And the beauty of that is there's always one bird that is willing to be in the front, to be at the very front of that V, and that bird is taking the brunt of the wind resistance, and every bird behind that front bird gets a break in the resistance, and they are lifted and buoyed by that front bird willing to take the shot, willing to take the heat. And in that formation, birds can travel, you might think a little bit farther or maybe twice as far, or the numbers are staggering. In the V formation, you can fly 71% farther. That is the strength of that V pattern, and that is the strength of teamwork. And the cool thing is there's never one bird that stays there the whole time. They rotate and they take turns so that their endurance is just magnified, and that's what teamwork is all about. Another example of teamwork is one draft horse can pull 700 pounds. 2 draft horses can pull 2,100 pounds. It triples the strength, and that is the beauty to me. Those are examples of the beauty of marriage and what teamwork. The Bible says one might be overcome, but 2 can stand because someone has your back, and that's marriage, that's partnership. In this profession, this calling where life is on the line, if you have just one person in your life who's willing to help you and to stand with you, married firefighters have much, much lower rates of PTSD, and I believe that's because of that person, that partner that is helping you stand in this tough, tough calling to face life and death, to answer this calling to save human life, which, in my opinion, is the highest calling of all. And spouses out there, if you are supporting this firefighter in your life, you are part of the fire service family. You are helping them go farther, to pull more weight, to go the distance, to stand and to be healthy and to save lives. And that's what it's really all about. The fire service is about saving human lives and being there for other people. And as a team and as a husband and wife team, you can do it better, do it together. And I love to remember that. It makes me feel really good that I help my husband do these things. And the things that he did to reciprocate was to always make sure that I knew I was number one in his heart, in his life. I am number one. Fire service was number 2. And as long as I knew I was number 1, then I didn't get jealous. A spouse can grow to hate this profession, as noble as it is, if it starts to feel number 1. He was really good at making sure I knew I was number 1. I was his best friend. I'm the one that's going to be here when it's all over. And that's what helped me to be a supportive spouse. So that's how I like to kind of end it, that remember, together you can do this. It's amazing. You can have both families as long as your first family is first. And one of the ways to do that is to remember what it's really all about, that it's about saving lives, which is the highest calling of all. In our opinion, it is a profession, a calling that is noble and worth it and good and very satisfying, very meaningful, much more meaningful than the ways a lot of people spend their free time is, doing stuff for themselves, which isn't very satisfying. The fire service is very satisfying and meaningful, and you can do it together as husband and wife.
Fantastic. That to me is a wonderful way to summarize and put a closing paragraph on tonight's show. However, sorry, one more thing. Mike, I got to put you on the spot again because you are a national speaker for the fire service. You're nationally and internationally recognized and respected, and you carry a lot of weight with your opinions, your ideas, your writings, your thoughts. So I've asked every major player that I've had on this podcast over the last 7 years to endorse or not endorse the premise of this show. See, you thought I was going to get all serious on you. I'm not. The premise of the show, that being a professional firefighter has nothing to do with earning a paycheck. And I would like to know Mike Gagliano's take on that as one of the most respected firefighters in the United States. Well, everyone loves your classes, your books, everything you have to say. I mean, you can just see the people lined up to talk to you at the conferences. So your words matter. And I would like to get just, if you could take a minute or so and just either endorse or not endorse the premise of the show. Because there are trolls out there that try to troll me, and I ignore every single one of them. So what do you have to say to the trolls out there about being a professional firefighter?
Well, it probably would be a repeat of what I said at the beginning of the show. There's a simple reality. You're a firefighter or you're not. It's that simple. Whatever else you decide to put in front of that, you're a paid firefighter or a volunteer firefighter or a paid on-call firefighter, an urban or a suburban or a hazmat or a technical or a I'm cool with whatever you want to put in front of that. But the most important thing to me, for every one of you, and certainly for the backbone of the National Fire Service, let's face it, the backbone of the National Fire Service is the volunteer fire departments around the nation who day in, day out are getting out of bed, knowing they got to get up early and go to work. They're getting out of bed at 3 a.m. to go serve their community in homage of the historic nature and way our nation was formed in the first place. It's everything that's good about our nation. It doesn't matter to me, whatever you put in front of I am a firefighter. The question is, do you deserve to wear that badge? And if you're going to put our badge on, you have to be a pro, because we don't have a choice. Seconds count. The call that you went to yesterday is not going to be the call to you today. It's going to be completely different. But there's going to be somebody who's in need, and to wear our badge. Tom, I like to couch it this way. We get 3 things when we are given the privilege or the honor of being a part of our fire department. So you think about your own job, those of you that are listening. You think about your job, not mine, not Seattle Fire, not Tom's. You think about your fire department. Those men and women entrusted with the safekeeping of people's lives in your community have asked you, given you the privilege to become a member of their fire department. And when they do, there's 3 things that happen. Number 1, they give you a badge, and it should be one of the honors of your life to be considered worthy to wear our badge, because you identify with every single firefighter who has lived. You identify with our calling, and it means something. And that badge, when people see it, there's a respect accorded to it, not because of what you've done, but because of what those before you have done to demonstrate that the badge of the fire service is to be respected, honored, and when you see that badge, you know the individual wearing it is worthy of your trust. You need to earn that. The second thing they do is they put a patch on your arm, and that identifies you with your department. And men and women have sacrificed through the years to establish that department, however it's configured, to establishment as a point of pride and service and commitment to the community. And you need to earn that. And you need to understand that your actions are a direct reflection on that department. And your actions and your behavior and the words you use need to stand up and be counted for that badge. And the final thing they do, you go from all of us with your badge, you go to your individual team, your tribe, your clan with your patch. And then the last thing they do is they write your name across the front of your shirt. And the words you have, the actions you take, the way you commit to the profession, the way you train, the way you treat your fellow brothers and sisters, every single bit of that is telling a story attached to your name. And when your name is spoken, all of those actions are going to come together into a reputation. They're going to tell a story, and you only get to write that story once. I would encourage you to earn the badge, earn the patch, and make sure that the story that you're writing when your name is spoken is the type of story you want to be told. If you do that, brother, you're going to have a wonderful career. You're going to have a blast. however your department is configured, you're going to be what you described in the beginning of this broadcast. You're going to be a pro. And I think if you're going to be a firefighter, every one of us needs to be a pro.
Oh, wow. Wow, very powerful. Very powerful. I have probably 12 quotes from that. So I'm going to be quoting you. You'll be seeing your quotes on my Facebook page and elsewhere. But I will give you full credit. Don't worry about that.
Well, you know what, Bill? I'll tell you what. We are honored to spend time with you. I want you to know that. And you said some really nice things. And you said some of the things you said are humbling to hear, that people enjoy coming to my classes and those types of things. And I'm really glad that's the case. But I want every one of you to know, however big your department is, however small, wherever you are in the organization, we are all just very fallible, very flawed men and women trying to fulfill together as a team one of the most immense and wonderful callings there is in this world. The fire service is a magnificent calling. And we're all just a bunch of dudes and dudettes coming together and trying to fill a role and to bring the strengths that we have and our weaknesses, to bring those to the table, to create a team that can actually deliver service. There are no great champions out here. There are no superstars or rock stars. There's just a bunch of us trying to use our stuff to make that team the best it can be. And I would just encourage you to do that. And don't be dissuaded, and don't be held down. Bring your talents and your strengths to the table and let it strengthen our teams. And that includes, gang, what you do in your families. Let your families be a part of the job and part of the organization so that you can do it together.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. And Mike and Anne, I can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come on to my show and spend now approaching, I know we didn't want to go this long, but almost 2 hours. And before we end, I'd like to give each of you the opportunities to give your contact information. And Mike, if you could summarize again, I'll start with you. The offer, the very kind offer that you are extending to our listeners for a copy of your book, Anne and your book, The Challenges of the Firefighter Marriage, as well as the Paul Combs calendar for 2020, and how people can get info to you so you can fill their order. So if you wouldn't be so kind to do that, that would be great.
Yeah, our contact information is all the same. Just for brevity, I'll just tell you what it is. If you want to get a hold of either Anne or I, the best way to do it, the email is MikeYJay@AOL.com. Mikey J, MikeYJay@AOL.com. And that Anne reads that email, so that's probably just the easiest. We can keep everything in one place. If you need to get a hold of us through social media, just look me up on Facebook. That's the best, Mike Gagliano. The second G is silent, but there is a G there, and you should be able to get me on Facebook pretty easily. And Anne also, reads my Facebook page, and we kind of communicate through those two means of doing it. As far as the book offer, $30 plus a couple bucks shipping, and we will send you, personalized or otherwise, a copy of the Firefighter Marriage book. We'll pay the taxes and all that stuff, and we'll also send you, as long as we have them, we'll send you a copy of the Firefighter calendar. In fact, I already got pinged by somebody on Facebook. Eric, thanks for listening to the podcast. Your words were very kind. We appreciate it a lot. And I'm pretty sure we still have a few copies that Paul Combs signed as well. So if I have some of those left, I'll make sure that since you're the first one who pinged us, you get a copy that Paul signed as well. So yeah, $30 for the calendar and the book, and we'll do that as long as we have calendars, brother.
Very gracious. Nice. Very nice offer. And Anne, any final words that you'd like to extend? And again, thank you so very much for your time and all your work tonight.
Well, I always love to end. I can say this because I'm not a firefighter, but firefighters listening, you're the best people in the world, and you represent the very finest qualities of human beings, in my opinion. And I just hope you know how special and wonderful you are. And the reason that I do all this is because I love you. I think you're amazing, and I really want you to have happy, strong marriages, because I think that's the very best thing you can have in this life. So hope you know you're wonderful, and I really want you to be happy at what you do and happy at home.
Yeah, Tom, we do classes as well. We'd love to come to your fire department. I know we're in, shut down and no travel mode now, but I'll tell you, last year we were probably in, 20, 30 fire departments doing both fire classes that you talked about that I do. We do those during the day so that the firefighters can have something fun to do. Then they go home and get their spouse, and we come back in the evening, and the spouses, they come together as couples, send the kids off to the sitter, and Ann and I do a couple hours of Firefighter Marriage with you as couples. And hopefully 2021 we'll be doing those things, and if you'd like to do that, just reach out to us, and we'll figure out how to make it work.
Oh, excellent. And again, anyone that has not had the opportunity to see them speak, you will not be disappointed. So, again, Ann, Mike, thank you so very much for being on the show tonight, and I look forward to seeing you down the road. I really do.
Yeah, you too, brother.
Yeah,
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And folks listening, I know, again, I went quick. I can't believe it's been 2 hours. Again, we skimmed through just a few of the highlights in this book, and there is so much more to read and digest and talk about and do some personal reflections on. We covered, obviously, the 5 essential conversations. We covered the effects of trauma and danger and sleep deprivation. But even like spaced throughout the book, each chapter has real-life stories that are shared by real-life fire service members, many of them well-known. Some of them are fire service legends, well-known and respected members of this great profession. And they, along with their spouse, would share some of their stories, good and bad, and everything in between, actually. Some funny, some tragic, some of all sorts of experiences to share. Good stuff, powerful and impactful stories in every chapter shared by fire service legends and their spouse and how they survived the challenge of their firefighter marriage. So much more in the book than we had time to talk about tonight. Essential conversations we covered, but there's a section on how to live with a firefighter and importance of exercise, the importance of a spouse helping and listening to the firefighter, and the power of touch. Yes, there's a section on sex and marriage and pornography and how that can impact a marriage. A section on children and raising children and their thoughts on raising children. A very poignant section to me on fathers and daughters that I was hoping I could get into tonight, but just didn't have the time because I have 4 daughters. A section on money, a very impactful section on firefighting and cancer, and just so much more powerful information. Please reach out to Ann and Mike to get a copy of the book, Challenges of the Firefighter Marriage, and you won't be disappointed, and it hopefully will help you out in your own marriage. So that's all I got for you tonight. I'd like to again thank Fire Engineering, Chief Bobby Halton, Clarion Events, for supporting these podcasts. Thank you to our sponsor, MSA. They sponsor all of these great fire service podcasts, including our guest here tonight, Mike Gagliano, and his podcast with Michael Dugan. They have a great, great podcast that I never miss an episode of, Mikey D and Mikey G Show, or is it the Mikey G and Mikey D Show? I don't want to get that out of order, so I don't want to get in trouble. But thank you to MSA for sponsoring these podcasts and Chief Halton and Clarion Events for supporting them. My next show will be on Tuesday in November. I had it written down here. I don't know where it went, but it's a Tuesday in November, and I can promise you I will again have some fantastic guests. It's going to be hard to top tonight's guests because they were so excellent, but I promise we will have another great guest, another great topic. If you'd like to reach out to me, please do so at my email, tamerrill63@aol.com. Check out any of my social media platforms, including the Professional Volunteer Fire Department, which is on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I continuously post informational articles, Instagram posts, information, motivational words of wisdom to help us all better navigate our volunteer fire service world. I have a YouTube channel now. I put the podcast on the YouTube channel, as well as a lot of cool fire service history videos that I've been collecting. So please check out my Professional Volunteer Fire Department YouTube channel and give that a like and a follow. I'd really appreciate that. There's going to be a lot more coming. I am still working on a new cool website. Myself personally, a couple chances if you'd like to listen in on some of the things I'm doing. I have an upcoming webinar focusing on leadership, and my spin focusing on leadership in the volunteer fire service world. I'm going to be doing it for the National Volunteer Fire Council, professional development for the volunteer fire officer. That'll be on October 14th, just a couple weeks from now. You can get some information on that on nvfc.org. They will be posting information on how to subscribe and watch that webinar. And I will also be doing a webinar for the fine folks at Penwell and Clarion because the class I was supposed to do at the United Fire Conference in September, which we had to cancel, I will be doing that as a webinar as well. Date to be determined, but it won't be in the too far distant future. It's going to be professional. That's going to be my officer development and leadership success in the volunteer fire service. So lots going on, and again, reach out to me if I can be of help. If you have ideas for a show or guests, I'd love to hear from all of you. So feel free to get a hold of me. Reach out to me at tamerrill63@aol.com or any of my social media sites. My next show is Tuesday, November 10th. I knew I had it written down somewhere, and I look forward to talking to you again. Thanks for tuning in, and wherever you happen to be listening from, please stay safe, and remember that developing, maintaining, and portraying a professional image is the duty and responsibility of all firefighters, paid or volunteer. It's really that simple. No matter where you are, no matter where you serve, your residents are owed professional service delivered by professional firefighters representing a professional organization. Take care, folks. Again, thanks to everybody for listening in, and a special thanks again to Anne and Mike for being on the show this evening. Take care.